My name is Hunter Lovins. I am the co-founder of COPx, that is Conferences of People Independently Organized. This is Rich Wilson, who is, are you the founder? Co-founder of
the Global Citizens Assembly, and I'm Chief CEO of ISWE Foundation.
And this is Laura Lopez, and I will let you explain your role here and previously.
Thank you, Hunter. I was the Director of Conference Affairs for UNFCCC for 8 years, so I was responsible for making COPs happen, the operational part. I retired 2 years ago, and since then I've been consulting for Brazil to produce COP30. Don't send all the complaints to me, please. I'll share them.
Laura is the reason that the COP has worked at all. We're here because we're having a conversation about the extent to which COP doesn't work. COP can never work, even assuming the logistics work. And you know, this is the pin from COP3 and the pin from COP30. I've been doing these things for a very long time. They all have technical problems, and they all happen. And in that 30 years, emissions have doubled. And here we are. Whatever it is that works about a COP, it isn't solving the climate crisis. So then what? So about 4 years ago, I was approached by a very senior UN official who said the COPs can never work, will never work. Their very nature is such that any one nation can veto anything. And as a result, any great idea that gets argued about and most people agree on will die. So if that's the problem, is there any solution to the climate crisis? And this man said, we need to recognize when, in international jurisprudence, when government fails, power reverts to the people, the sovereign. And it is time for the people to step up and solve the climate crisis. So we know how to solve the climate crisis. Stop burning fossil fuel, switch to renewables, now everywhere on Earth cheaper, and use regenerative agriculture to take the excess carbon out of the air, put it back in the soil where it belongs, where it becomes a nutrient for the soil, builds healthier food, healthier communities, healthier people. Why isn't it happening? Because people everywhere want it, and politicians think they can get away without delivering it. Globally representative surveys show that, take your pick, 80%, 85%, 94% of people want aggressive climate action, and at the same time, well fewer than 40% think anybody else feels the same way, which is to say we all feel alone. We think we're the only one. And if you're the only one, you keep your head down. You don't stand up and make a fuss. And his suggestion was we create a globally aware, largest movement in history of people who want a climate-safe future. We can have this as soon as we all recognize that this is what we all want. So he asked if I would join him, and arguably foolishly I did. He is a very senior UN official. If the UN ever figured out what we're doing, they'd fire him, so I get to be the face of this for a little while. But this isn't a movement about me. It certainly isn't a movement about any leader. This will only work if we empower people everywhere to begin implementing the known solutions in their own communities in their own ways. And that's a challenging thing to do. So our job is to build this global movement with no money, no staff, on the belief that this is what we need to do, and on the strength of volunteers We kept this quiet for a few years. He said, you can't talk about it, and you darn sure can't tell anybody about me. It's tricky going to a foundation and saying, I have the answer. I can't tell you what it is. I can't tell you who's doing it. Trust me. Yeah. Amazingly enough, individuals put enough money in to keep this thing ticking along. And about a year ago, a foundation called up and said, Hunter, are you still working on this stuff? Yes. Here's $100,000. Like, really? And that has begun to build this movement. Literally an hour ago, I got a letter from the same foundation, we're renewing your grant. I was like, ah. So we are very much alive. After the US election, and I apologize for America's stupidity, the ambassador said, launch, just launch. So last February we did. I put a letter out to about 100 people around the world who'd had been told about it, and to my own organization, Natural Capitalism Solutions mailing list. We now have over 1,000 COPx organizers in more than 56 countries. These are individuals who have stepped up and said, I'll do it. And now with this additional grant, we will be able to build the social media capacity to take this to the world. Now, somewhere down the line, I bumped into Rich, who has a very similar but also very different idea. And we got to talking and said, let's partner. Let's do this together. So, Rich, you want to explain what it is that Global Citizens Assembly is?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And just as a kind of bit of a framing from what Hunter said, this isn't just a challenge. Sorry, my voice, after being at COP for like nearly the whole way through, my voice is beginning to stop working. It's not just a climate crisis, it's a democracy crisis, and it's not just climate, it's AI, it's public service, it's kind of everything. We're living in a really unique period in history, I think, whereby it's really one of the first times that we've had around the world politicians failing to follow what we would call decisive climate majority. So I used to be an advisor to the Environment Minister under the Blair government. In those days, you had levels of support for climate action between like 48% and 52%. I was at London Climate Week earlier this year, and people were saying we've lost the argument on climate. We've gone down from astronomical numbers from the 90s down to like 66% in the States, 77% in Brazil, 75% Europe, 75% in India. These are what you call decisive majorities, where you don't need consultation, where you don't need to engage the public, because you've got a total mandate for action, and yet no action is taking place. That's exactly the case. So across the world, we're seeing this extraordinary movement of people reimagining their politics. We did a piece of research recently documenting the number of formal participatory processes that have happened in the last decade. It's 7,500 that we can identify, but it's many, many more than that that are unidentified. My colleague Iñaki, who's a Chilean academic, has identified 30,000 informal processes, a bit like the COPx thing, in Chile alone. There's this extraordinary global movement of people organizing in the face of the crisis. And so really what we're trying to do with the Global Citizens Assembly is tie this together. So we ran the first, so for those people who aren't aware, the Citizens Assembly as a model, and the classic version is you select people by lottery, and then it's segmented, so it's representative of the global population, and they learn about an issue, they deliberate, and then they make kind of decisions to take that forward. At the Global Citizens Assembly, we're changing that up a bit. We've got absolutely the global element. We've also got community assemblies, which are similar to what COPx is about, but the difference being is we are trying to support people to run assemblies as a new governance infrastructure. So it's not just about climate, it's also about AI, it's also about other things, but it's about using the methodology of assemblies, which we know are really good at generating better policy than politicians, overcoming polarization, overcoming misinformation, building citizen action and inclusion. But the problem is the scale issue. We've just got a real problem with scale. And so So on Thursday of this week, with the Brazilian presidency and the UNFCCC, we'll be launching a permanent global citizens assembly as a infrastructure, as legacy of COP30. The goal is to get 100,000 people engaged a year from now, 1 million by 2030, maybe many, many more. And I think the point being is that some people have looked at our work and Hunter's work and COPx and suggested that there's a kind of problem around competition. Nobody knows how to solve this issue of how we govern today. What we need is a diversity of practice, a diversity of approaches to innovate and learn in terms of how on earth do we govern in the 21st century. So thanks very much for inviting me along here today. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, somebody came up to me earlier this week and said, have you heard about Global Citizens Assembly? They've stolen your idea. I said, yeah, it's Rich Wilson. He's a friend, a collaborator, and we are not competitive. We need all of this. And do feel free to eat your lunch. It's now 5 o'clock. COP's like that. You know, you're running all day. Laura, you have been in the belly of the beast since what, Paris?
Since COP23 in Bonn. But I wanted to go back to where your introduction to say, you say COPs don't work. I mean, to me, they actually do work, not necessarily because of the negotiations. That is fraught with all the things you mentioned, which is governments maybe want to do the right thing, but it's all consensus. So it's very difficult to show that the negotiations are going to have an impact on emissions. But what has happened, at least in my time, my 8 years in UNFCCC, is we went from having really focused on negotiations to having what many people call the circus, which has really taken over. So it's a combination of civil society, organized in 9 constituencies. They have, if you continue on this little path here, you go to the 9 side event rooms. Those are only for civil society. They bid on having the space and the time in the side event rooms, but that's their area. So in every single COP, part of the host country agreement requires all hosts to give this space to civil society. They have over 400 admitted organizations. They've had to slow down because there is a cap on how many badges each organization will get. But there's more in the UNFCCC process than in any part of the United Nations. United Nations in general, in ECOSOC, you apply, you're in for a few years, and then they wipe the slate clean and you have to apply again. UNFCCC, to its credit or perhaps not, doesn't get rid of anyone if they participate or not. You stay in and they keep admitting more every year. Right now there's between 12 and 14,000 admitted organizations that have badges. They can use daily badges so they can bring more people in. They can swap the badge out every day. But I think the presence of civil society in this particular process is what's making this worthwhile. There have been many initiatives among the parties to have COPs every other year, have them smaller. There's always a pushback, even from countries who are being criticized by civil society. And the pushback is, we want a yearly COP, things change, and we all think it's healthy to have civil society's voice. So to me, when you talk about people feeling kind of they're alone, they're out there, they're fighting in their communities, I think this is the prime example in climate change in the world where people are desperate to come and engage and make a difference. Now, can we continue this? We're just having a debate on who's going to host COP31. There are 2 countries fighting over it. Nobody wants to skip the COP. No one wants to go to Bonn, which is the default. If they can't decide, then it goes to Bonn for a very small thing. No one wants that, and people are lobbying very hard to keep the COPs going. In addition to that, the UNFCCC has renewed its climate initiatives, having climate conferences, small ones, around in different regions. They have between 2 and 4 a year. Those aren't binding. The negotiators are not the stars. It's all the civil society, but people want them. So to me, what you're doing, Hunter, is picking up on these good initiatives. What you're doing, Rich, is there's stuff out there. It's just a question of how you can pull it together and then make people to continue to work in a very positive way. The other thing I would mention is this is the first COP in 4 where we've had people who had the permission to march in the streets. We had Egypt, we had Dubai, we had Baku, where no permissions were given by the city or the state for anything in the street. So we did have one incident a couple nights ago where the indigenous people came in. Some of them, not all of them, broke in and tried to get inside. So it was clearly a provocation to try and have a pushback between letting people have their voices and coming in. Other than that, all the marches here have been peaceful. A lot of people who normally are out marching are kind of giving the space to indigenous civil society in Brazil. So I think there are all sorts of positive support that is being shown among many of us. That's why I think for the moment COPs are still very useful. How you then combine COPx and support or complement what happens at COPs, I think for me that's one of the challenges. For the most part, we have right now at least the next 2 COPs. We know that there's goodwill to have them. We've already got Ethiopia being the host for COP32, and each region is coming behind it. I don't see COPs actually going away anytime soon. Yeah.
No, I don't imagine that a COP will go away. The problem is climate change is not going away either. And the COPs aren't solving climate change. So then what? And this is where Rich's work and ours comes together, that the solution won't come from here unless it's in conversations like this. So at Now Partners, which I'm a managing partner, we host evening dialogues. People come, sit, have a drink, couple presentations, and talk about real solutions. When we did this at Egypt, the Egyptian climate market emerged out of that process. Here we've been having conversations with the ministers, with local agriculturalists, and it looks like the Terra initiative, part of Brazil's action agenda between now and 2030, will be something that we will be engaged in. That's a real solution. If you can take a country and enable them to transition to regenerative agriculture, that's a real climate solution. If every country were to do this, again, that's half the solution to the climate crisis. So for my sins, I guess I'll keep coming back to COPs, but at the same time, even that's not enough. And what clearly is needed now is empowering people in every community across the world to begin taking their own responsibility for solving it in their own way in their own community.
I mean, I often think, don't quote me on this because it's a long time ago that I was involved with this research, but I'm pretty sure that the UK charities Keep Britain Tidy is directly correlated with spikes in litter, and the NSPCC, the National Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Children, is directly correlated with, unfortunately, increased reported incidents of child abuse. There's no doubt that both of those organisations are extremely valuable and have got nothing to do with those issues in place. And so, and my feeling is, at this moment in time, I actually think we need more than ever spaces for member states, for the parties to come together. We might be entering into this multipolar world. We know it's a tough time for multilateralism. We know that many of our I'm very close to a bunch of administrations have been infected by this polarization condition, which makes that more difficult. But I think it actually makes the importance of COPs more important than ever before. However, clearly, as Hunter says, more is required. And I think the way I think about it is it's like, and multilateralism and global governance is just not like local or nation states, which have got thousands of years of traditions whereby you are in charge of square miles or kilometers of land. It's very different. I often think you're like claiming space. Talk about the political theorist John Gaventa. You're claiming political space. So in many ways, post-war, The UN claimed this multilateral state-based space. Very, very importantly, very, very usefully, if you think of the incidents of security stabilization which happened across many parts of the world in that period. But it's insufficient. And the way I've envisaged it is we now need to extend the tent. We need to claim more space. We need to legitimize the roles of people, of communities, as critical actors, not just in terms of behavior change, but as being able to acknowledge, in some ways, I think one of the most helpful frames of this is the transactional analysis frame, the parent-child, adult-adult relationship. You can think of it in relationships like a doctor and a patient. The doctor has got legal power. They can prescribe medicine. They have got expertise. But it's up to the patient to decide to act, to take it, to be able to do so at scale. And so I think what we're seeing happening right now with Hunter's work, with ours, but with the thousands of people around the world who are organizing in the face of the crisis, the creation of new wings of this tent. And what we really need to do is build a broader tent, acknowledge them and bring them all into what is, and it's a matter of expanding the availability of power, the availability of agency, to realize we are up to the challenge.
I think listening to you speak, it provoked a thought in me, which is why I think there's a lot of hope with COP still, which is just getting over that polarization and having people not see the civil society as the enemy, trying to create these opportunities like these dialogues that you mentioned, where especially the governments have the opportunity to see that there's a value in trying to tap into some of this energy that's out there. I don't think it happens enough. I'm not saying that every country that's represented at the COP will do that, but it's been eye-opening and really hopeful that the opportunities to do that, especially with the COP presidencies, have increased in the last years. When I started COP23, we had 23,000 people. Germany hosted Fiji as the presidency, so it was a bit of an odd fit in this presidency, but the opportunity for the presidency to pull this off in Europe and talking to people that they really had never engaged with before, it actually turned out to be a very positive experience. Also, they had a way of, their chieftains would sit and they had a Talanoa dialogue, so they would sit on these mats. Well, we took that to Germany. So we had this sort of cultural clash that ended up being something that people really enjoyed, and even to this day in the process they'll say, why don't we have another Talanoa dialogue? Because that's how we break through some of these sort of our suits and our structures. But I think there's some positive experiences that have come. I think because the indigenous movement is so strong at this particular COP, and because this Brazilian presidency recognized an opportunity, both federal and also in the state, it's working this time. The indigenous voices have actually given some hope to some of the other groups that have kind of fallen by the wayside. But of the 9 constituencies, some are very vocal and some are very successful. Many of the others just kind of sit in the back and watch. We've got, for example, research institutes. That's an entire constituency. They don't even talk to the other constituencies as much as they could. So I think there's a lot, just one example, but there are a lot of opportunities even within this process in the constituencies where if you had a catalyst like COPx, let's say the week before COPs, you had a global COPx event, I think it would actually give great potential to this going from where we are today to where we can get.
We're sitting in the booth of the California Climate Registry. This is the state's own carbon market. When the U.S. failed to put in place a carbon market, as it had promised to do, and as it tried to do, the state of California stepped up and said, we're the world's then 5th largest, now 4th largest economy. Let's create our own carbon market, and they did. And on the strength of that, helped China create its carbon markets, teamed with Quebec. There are conversations around creating a West Coast carbon market. In the United States now, there is a lot of talk, I hope it's just talk, about civil war and about the Western states breaking away. What California is showing is you don't have this. And in Colorado, 2 cities announced a climate commitment. Third was their emissions came down and their economy went up. It drove job creation. It drove better business. And as this sort of recognition spreads, that we don't have to wait on UNFCCC, on a COP, to have the answer, because, again, it's never going to happen. We need to start figuring out how to use what you're doing with the Global Citizens Assembly, what we're doing with empowering people everywhere, and what the COPs are doing now with things like the Action Agenda and bringing more people in to get people everywhere to recognize it's on us. If we're going to solve this one, it's on us. At the same time, all of us little people need help. If you are sitting in your apartment in the middle of nowhere thinking, what can I do? You need somewhere to reach out to learn what it is that you can do. So one of the things we will create is called a Localpedia, which is a database of all best solutions. Who has done this somewhere in the world, and how do you get a hold of them? And so we're chatting with folk about AI solutions on how to scrub the web of what works, trying to figure out how to have a global conversation. We looked at building our own platform. Yeah, that's real costly, and people are already on platforms. So how do we use the platforms they're on, Facebook, LinkedIn, WhatsApp, Instagram, to engender this conversation where everybody's talking? Here's what I did today. What did you do today? I was approached shortly after the ambassador pitched me on the idea of COPx. I was approached by a woman, housewife, who was concerned that her son was breathing air polluted by a local cement factory. And she said, is there any way to get it shut down? I said, well, I don't know. She said, its permit to operate is up for renewal. Is there anything we can do? And I thought, this is a test of COPx. And I said, I'll help you. She did it, I didn't. This year that plant will close. That's 600,000 tons of CO2 every year that has been pumped out into the atmosphere. She organized a few people, asked would I come to a little rally and speak? Sure. To count them, 9 people. Would I come to a meeting 2 days later? Sure. To talk to 45 people. Next week, would I testify to the Planning Commission? 75 of us testified, and the Planning Commission voted against the plant. And as I said, the damn thing is going to close. This is one woman who was concerned about the health of her son, telling these stories of what individuals, communities, cities, states have done is, I think, now the essential thing to do to empower people. What are you guys telling people?
So, yes, so I guess one of the things, so most of the organizers we're working with are, so we've been supporting large numbers of organizers over the last couple of years, and it's a little bit different because in some ways what we're setting is it's more like a new governance infrastructure. So they might end up wanting to shut down a factory or do rewilding or whatever it is, but we start from a place of like, what is it that we're trying to do? And so most of the groups are broadly representative of the community. So at least equal in terms of gender and age, etc. And it's incredible how AI is really enabling us to be able to support people run really high quality citizens assemblies in different parts of the world. So I think, from what in many ways what's happening is government, with the increased costs, with the increased fragility, we're creating new governance systems which can expand the power base that's out there. So I think what we're really looking at is how you can create new civic chambers, which go back to that kind of ancient, sometimes Athenian, but it's a much more older model than that, whereby people are selected by lottery, people are representative of their community, and they are taking charge on the issues that they're interested in. And I was giving some advice to someone setting up one of these community assemblies near where I live, so I went along a little bit like what you did, Hunter. And the leader of the council there, a young woman that I really liked, she said to me, Richard, what's the point in this happening? Because none of my other members who are going to really take this very seriously. And I said to them, well, this was before the UK election last summer. And I said, let's say the Labour Party come in and they double your budget. Are you going to have enough money for infrastructure repairs, cost of living, just social care increase the demographic costs? And she said, no, even if they double our budget, we are not going to be able to meet our existing legal obligations. Even if it was doubled. I said, exactly, and look what they're interested in. They're interested in like rewilding, community assets, street furniture, the list goes on and on. I said, look, just let them run with it. Just support them. And of course, if you can, give them legitimacy, if you can give them resources, but fundamentally, we're creating, I think, that next tier of democracy. And just one other thing I'll say is, I often say how I think we're living through the fourth great democratic struggle. First, anti-colonial, second, voting, third, civil rights, and I think we don't know quite what this one is yet. I often say to people, I think if you imagine like 20 years before universal suffrage, we didn't quite know what it would be like for everyone to have the vote, and when they did, look, in my country, the NHS was born. The NHS, our National Health Service, would never have come in if women hadn't had the vote. Whenever you expand the suffrage, when you expand the diversity of people involved in politics, better decisions get made. The evidence on that is open and shut. And so fundamentally, I think that's what we're doing. We're basically, we're creating, but what we've really been having to do in this space is enabling people to feel like they don't need to be in a permissive relationship with the state, but they can just get on with it. If you live here and you've got kids in the community, that's enough. Your skin in the game is more or less total. That's what we've really been learning we have to do, is just basically support people to set up the assemblies and feel they are actors in building the new governance models.
So as a native Californian, growing up with smog, I remember my entire childhood. I don't think I ever remember the sky as being blue. It was from Los Angeles. So I know that change can happen. I know that, getting good governance, picking the right initiatives and policies, even from governance that came from different political parties, it changes things. So I'm a real believer. What I think the challenge is for the next generations, at least what I know of North America and Europe, the millennials and Gen Z are very cynical, and they don't see, for the reasons kind of what you were both describing, they feel like this relationship with the state it's too big, it's too powerful, and they don't see ways like, I remember having options and revolutions sort of in the 60s, but I think there's a very small window of time we have to get these people engaged before the tide really turns. So to me, it's the initiatives you both have are very timely, but just like climate change, I don't think we have that much time to get people on board. If we wait too long, they just get more cynical, and it's really difficult. I mean, I have kids who are in their 20s and 30s, and none of them want kids, and they're very typical of their generations. In the world, any social scientist will tell you the human race has never had more opportunities. We've never been healthier. There should be opportunities right now for everybody to find a way to make a difference, but it's actually many times the opposite. So I think, let's get cracking. Don't wait any longer.
No kidding, we're in trouble. The climate catastrophe is upon us. It's killing people. It's wiping out whole regions. The Allianz board member, Gunther Thallinger, had a piece in LinkedIn last February where he said whole regions are becoming uninsurable. He said if you have no insurance, you have no mortgages, you have no banking, you have no financial system, you have no local businesses. He said this is a climate-driven credit crunch. And he said we are looking at the end of the economy, we're looking at the end of capitalism. To which some wag wrote in, oh, and the end of humans too. We really are facing an existential crisis, and it is going to get worse and worse. We are getting Category 5 hurricanes now on a not uncommon basis. In Jamaica, where the hurricane just hit, wiped out the fossil infrastructure. People have power, though, because increasingly in Jamaica, people have been putting solar on their roofs. And so this goes hand in hand as well with the technological solution of enabling people everywhere to begin meeting their own needs in their own ways. Food. There is a scenario that was done in Europe saying that the thesis of it was there was a climate-driven crop failure. And all of a sudden in Europe, they ran out of food and there were riots in the streets. And what are we going to do? What's the government going to do? What are local governments going to do? What's the EU going to do? This is not out of the realm of possibility sort of any time now. The 5 staple crops depend on a stable climate, which is, as we know, vanishing. Reality is a very stern change agent. And in my darkest moments, my hope is that as people come up against it, they'll turn to each other and say, it's just us. What is justice? Just us. What are we going to do together to preserve life in our own community? This is what government is supposed to do. This is why those damn negotiators are down the way arguing over commas and brackets. They ought to be arguing over what will it take to give us a climate-safe future, and they're not. So it's just us. How do we then begin to learn to work together locally, but also globally, so that we can be in conversation and we can be sharing the best practices? And when what works in your global assemblies is there for those people, how can we in COPx be blowing out to the whole world? Hey, do you want to be a part of one of these? Talk to these people, and here's how you do a global assembly. One of the things we're doing in COPx is partnering with every organization that wants to partner with us. So Earth Day International and Earth Guardians and a group in the UK called Kite Insights, you know these guys, Sophie Lambin, who has put out a manual for employees. How can you implement climate action in your own community? And on an almost everyday basis, I bump into another group, and when they hear about COPx, they say, well, I want to partner with you. Like, good, you are. Marina and I were in Paris last spring, met a wonderful woman named Sarah Roversi, who, among other things, runs Venice Climate Week. And she said, I want to be a part of COPx. I said, good, you are. She has trained 1,000 young people to be climate shapers. And so we will be working together, perhaps to do this meeting before the next COP of globally, what is it that people want to see come to the COP and come out of the COP? And of course, we would love to play with you.
I mean, every great democratic transition has been also driven by a great communications change. And so for me, COPs are very much a governance model that is a function of the broadcast age. And just as we still have televisions and they really, really matter, and we still read newspapers and they really, really matter, and we still talk to each other and it really, really matters, in the digital age, we will need to have new forms of governance. And so I don't think it's about, we're in a transcend and include moment. I was trained in California by an incredible organization called America Speaks, run by an amazing woman called Karen Lukensmeyer. I mean, I really recommend people look at her work. It was a process led by Schwarzenegger called, it was all about California Speaks on healthcare. And trying to, that tough issue of trying to get basically to more people, more the lower income people to have healthcare coverage in the States. That's what it's all about. But it was interestingly, that phenomenal process was quite broadcast. It was on in 2004. It was a bit like one of these big, like a global citizen concert. We have one in San Francisco, one in LA, all around the States. It was a powerful process. But where we are now is we are really needing to have these new forms of governance taking place that are fit for the digital age. We don't quite know what they look like yet, but already, indeed, before I came to COP, I had 2 days working with my digital team, and they didn't really believe that AI was going to transform the Citizens' Assembly movement. So I went home after the meeting and I stayed up until midnight and I designed a Citizens' Assembly for a village in Eritrea, one in the south of France, and where I'm from in North Wales and Llangollen, the 3 places we could validate the information for. It took me 3 hours to do 3, and I sent them to my team, that night, and they woke up pretty scared. And I said, could you please verify the quality of this information by the time you wake up, by the time we turn up at the meeting? And they were like, yeah, it's about 70%. I mean, honestly, just 2 years ago, that would have taken us minimum 6 months. I mean, it is mind-blowing what it can do, and I am turning a little bit into a kind of evangelical in that space. But I think what it does point to, if to nothing else, is that is whether we like, and there's a very controversial. The quality of facilitation is the key point of success or failure for our work in the Global Citizens Assembly. But people and many people think you shouldn't use ChatGPT to facilitate for very, very kind of obvious reasons. But people are. Whether you like it or not, many of our global partners are using it to facilitate meetings. It captures data really, really well. It doesn't distinguish between voices well at all, so it's really problematic. However, if you're dealing with a patriarchal community in a misogynistic culture, which basically doesn't allow women to speak or participate, which we absolutely are dealing with because we have a global project, it's a lot better than some of the traditional leaders who we're going to have to work with. And so this is the messy situation we're in, and how we create these blended new governance infrastructure. Because in other ways, and this speaks directly, I think, to your point, Hunter, is if we don't provide something, then there isn't anything there. It's not like there are governments in these places that are going to step in. So, yeah.
So you're making me think of something that happened as we were setting up this venue. As you could tell, we've had problems with air conditioning. Robin knows, because it was pretty hot in here the first few days. But at one point, all of our operations team, we had the question, which was, how hot can it be before people basically start collapsing? So I was thinking, so it was basically, can it be 30? Because we had, in the registration before we opened, it was about 31 degrees. So the question among the technical people was, if we put it at 27, is that okay? These are the kind of indicators that if you had a global dialogue, you would know automatically that it is, whatever it is, it's going to be probably 26, 27. But we know, for example, that smoking harms us. We know all sorts of things. We act on climate. I think there's still a dearth of information, or at least a dialogue on what we should be looking at. Maybe you all know because you're scientists or because you've been working in it your whole lives. The average person around the world probably wouldn't know, and they may not even know if the statistics that their governments are giving them are true or not. So I think there's plenty of ways to start this conversation again, but we have to start it.
We were in a session over there, and I was talking about the fact that 60 million years ago, the Earth was at 1,000 parts per million concentration of CO2. When humans evolved, it was 280. Where'd the carbon go? It turns out it went into the soil. And I said, and does anybody know what it is now? And the room sat there silent. It was like, come on, people, you're here at a climate meeting. You need to know this number. But they didn't. I was like, huh. 425 in case anybody's counting. Are there any questions, comments? Anybody done this better? Is it beer 30? Laura, are we going to get an agreement on where the next COP is?
By Friday, if there's not an agreement, then it goes back to Bonn. So the final gavel will determine, and they're actually trying to finish early, so we should know by Friday.
By Friday, folks, we'll know where we're going next. And please, if anything that we've said is of interest to you, join Global Citizens Assembly, join COPx. We need you. And Laura, thank you for everything you have done to make this COP happen. I know damned well without you it would not have.
And a few others.
Yeah, no doubt. A COP is a team sport, but...
I just want to say one final thing, which is a lot of people who are working in the kind of climate space or the policy space aren't that good at innovation and entrepreneurship. And they don't really realize that. I mean, has anyone here ever heard of Utterbeck's lock-in theory? Like, you know, if you, early days of bicycles, there was like the penny farthing. There are loads and loads of bikes out there because we didn't know the model that we're going to. And also, we've had innovation since then around like suspension, etc. When it comes to governance models, we're definitely at that space where we need to have a diversity of approaches. It's just critical. And so I see the next decade. I know we're in a rush. I know it's particularly, actually my much bigger concern, to be honest with you, than climate is truth and governance. And I think we've probably got, just think of it in my country, the BBC, one of the most trusted organisations, the legal requirement to deliver truth, has had its Director General effectively fired recently by the US President and his kind of association with some of the big tech companies. And that is what has happened. And what is most shocking is I realize I'm being filmed. I have not noticed any major CSOs coming out to defend it. I mean, the lack of political literacy and the lack of appreciation of the privilege we have in my country to have an organization which we definitely can trust. Like, we definitely can. And the reason it's in the news all the time is because people can take it to court, which they do all the time, when it gets things wrong. I mean, this is exactly what you want to have in a situation. So we are in a quite challenging situation whereby people do not really know what a democracy looks like, and they do not realize what are the pillars that it's based upon. So under these conditions, we have this very urgent question of how do we create these engines of sense-making and engines of truth production and dissemination before we lose our ability to do that. And I just want to say that, for me, I see the next decade as a period of an intense experimentation and research to work out how we protect our democracy and protect the basics like truth and co-sensing, because without that, how can we agree anything?
And I want to thank Robin for making this space available for us and for all the work that the Registry is doing to help solve the climate crisis. Thank you.